you're telling all of these women. That's what you're telling me right now. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're telling me that my assault doesn't matter. That what happened to me doesn't matter. And that you're going to let people who do these things into power.
It's a hard truth, but somebody's got to say it. And that hard truth is that currently too many women can't or are unwilling to set aside their subjectivity, their personal emotional reactions, their personal resentments and personal experiences even, to set that stuff aside in favor of dispassionate, rational analysis when it comes to allegations of sexual assault. We see this all of the time. It's all through the Me Too thing. It was way before the Me Too thing, and it's reached a new zenith with the issues in Washington right now with the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. This isn't an attack on women. I know it will be characterized as an attack on women, but it isn't, because not all women do this. This is a criticism of adults who either won't or can't identify their own predispositions to favor certain interpretations and certain conclusions when assessing an issue, right? And thinking mature adults, what they do is that they identify their predispositions and their personal biases and their desire to have certain conclusions affirmed, and they consciously make an effort to disable those predispositions because they want to know that the interpretations and their opinions about any issue is a reflection of something objectively true, that they're looking at that issue clearly and dispassionately, rather than generating opinions and interpretations that only reflect their own preferences, their own biases, their desire to see certain outcomes and to have their preconceived ideas and predispositions validated and affirmed. So I think we can hold at least two ideas in our head at the same time, even though that seems to have gone out of fashion. Everything seems to be reduced to binaries, where you either 100% think this and agree with me, or you must 100% think that, which is terrible. Right? This is not true. We can hold more than one idea in our head at the same time. So we can watch this video with Senator Jeff Flake being confronted by these two women in an elevator, essentially being cornered. We can hear their account of obviously terrible things that were done to them, and we can have sympathy and empathy for them, and at the same time we can be critical of what they're saying, because that young woman, what she's saying is that because Senator Flake won't treat Kavanaugh like he's guilty, then that means that he's saying that what happened to her and what happened to any other woman who was the victim of sexual assault doesn't matter. That's irrational, and it's infantile.
That's what you're telling all of these women. That's what you're telling me right now. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're telling me that my assault doesn't matter. That what happened to me doesn't matter. And that you're going to let people who do these things into power.
It's irrational, and it's profoundly unfair of her to say that to this man. And so here you have the patriarchy, right? This is the patriarchy. This is one of the powerful men in the patriarchy. And there he is having to stand in the corner with his head down and be screamed at by these women. And he knows that he has to stand there and take it, and that he can't say to her, I'm sorry for what happened to you, but what you're saying is nuts. Because what she's saying is nuts. So that is a particularly dramatic example of this widespread phenomena. And like I said, not all women do this. A lot of women see this sort of thing and they hate it. Here's a couple of examples. First one's from a comment on Facebook. I'm done. This is an embarrassment. As a woman, we have grace and courage, not acting like crazy people. They investigated and no witness said he did this, even her close friends at the time. I listened to both sides, and as a woman, I was too sexually assaulted many times in my life. It's not easy to live with, but what I know is you have to be sure, and she isn't sure where she was or when, etc. That's an issue. I remember where I was, when, and who did those things to me. Slander is a serious thing, and sadly, her family and his family are involved, and this is terrible for his younger girls. Can you imagine? His name is at stake. Forget the judge seat. Also, no woman speaks for me. I speak for myself.
I am devastated by the thought of a world in which people are guilty until proven innocent and the burden of proof is on the accused. I'm devastated by that world, and I listened to both of their testimonies, and while I think both are believable, I think only Kavanaugh is credible. He's the only one that has any substantiation for anything that he said, only one with any corroboration, the only one who has gone through 6 FBI background checks, the only one that has any evidence for anything that he's saying, and witnesses to back up what he's saying, or at least say, hey, I don't remember this. He's the only one that has that, and yet we're supposed to unconditionally believe the woman. Why? Because of her anatomy? I think that's unjust. I think it's discriminatory, and I don't believe it.
But a lot of women give themselves permission to have this level of emotional self-indulgence and to abandon principle and ethical thinking and any exercising of the kind of personal self-discipline where you hold yourself to a higher ethical standard rather than giving yourself over to pure vindictiveness and this kind of collective guilt thing where someone from your group harmed me or harmed someone from my group in the past, and therefore I'm justified in wanting to see you harmed as some kind of payback. There's nothing good about that whatsoever, and it is no different than the old days when a white guy would say, I was mugged by a black guy 3 years ago, therefore I want to see this black guy who's being accused of something, I want to see him treated like he's guilty, because that'll be really gratifying to me to see someone from that group get what's coming to him. It's the exact same thinking. Seeking satisfaction by seeing somebody punished or harmed because they happen to be of the same gender as someone who harmed you or harmed people in your group is despicable. It's unjustifiable, it's infantile, and it's contemptible. And it needs to be condemned whenever we see it, regardless of who is engaging in that kind of thinking. Right? This was the whole point of having principles. They compel us to set aside our personal vendettas and to hold ourselves to a higher standard, to do the right thing. And very often that means accepting that we won't always get the conclusions that we personally find most gratifying. But we seem to be chucking all of that very rapidly these days in favor of returning to a mode where satisfying personal grievance and vindictiveness and collective guilt and placing the onus on certain classes of people who are accused of something to prove their innocence is becoming the norm again. None of that's very good. This is going to get ugly. Never okay.